I swapped my cheating husband for glue, and the firefighters had to pull them apart. I never thought I'd be telling this story at 82 years old, but some things just need to come out. My name is Rose Mitchell, and for 43 years, I was a high school chemistry teacher in Clayton County, Georgia. That knowledge came in handy one fateful summer evening in 1985, though not in any way my students would have imagined. You know how they say still waters run deep. Well, I was those still waters, watching my husband Jerome's reflection ripple and distort over the years until I barely recognized the man I married. Before I tell you how I used my chemistry expertise for the most satisfying revenge of my life, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. And if you enjoy stories about sweet revenge served ice cold, make sure to like and subscribe. The day everything changed started like any other. I was in my garden, tending to my prized roses. Yes, I know, rose-growing roses. Jerome always said it was meant to be. The heavy Georgia air wrapped around me like a wool blanket, and the wind chimes my mama left me tinkled softly in the breeze. That's when I heard it, feminine laughter drifting through our bedroom window upstairs. Jerome was supposed to be at the auto shop he managed. I'd packed his lunch that morning like I always did, cornbread and collard greens, just the way his mama taught me. But there he was, in our bed at 2:30 in the afternoon, and he wasn't alone. I stood there among my roses, my pruning shears growing slick in my grip as that laughter continued. The voice belonged to Marjorie Wilson, my so-called best friend since college, the woman who'd been my maid of honor, who'd held my hand through 2 miscarriages, the same Marjorie who'd been bringing her famous sweet potato pie to our Sunday dinners for the past 20 years. The pruning shears slipped from my hands, landing with a soft thud in the soil. Above me, their voices grew louder, more distinct. I could hear Jerome's deep laugh, the same laugh that used to make my heart skip a beat when we first met at Clark College back in '62. Now it made my stomach turn. What would you do if you heard strange sounds coming from your bedroom when your spouse was supposed to be at work? I want you to think about that for a moment. I didn't storm upstairs right away. Instead, I sat down on my garden bench, my mind racing through 23 years of marriage. All those late nights at the shop, the mysterious phone calls that ended when I entered the room, the way Marjorie always seemed to know things about Jerome's schedule that I didn't. The betrayal burned in my chest, but something else was rising up. Something cold and calculating that remembered every chemical reaction I'd taught my students about adhesion and cohesion. You see, teaching chemistry wasn't just a job for me. It was my passion. I knew things about bonds, both chemical and human, that most people never consider. I walked to my shed, where I kept my gardening supplies, and more importantly, my collection of adhesives for various household projects. Jerome always teased me about my glue museum, as he called it. Little did he know how handy it would come in. As I stood there fingering the bottles of industrial-strength adhesive I used to repair garden furniture, a plan began forming in my mind. It wasn't just about catching them in the act anymore. It was about making sure they'd never forget the day they underestimate a chemistry teacher with access to industrial-strength adhesives and nothing left to lose. You might be wondering why I didn't just confront them right then and there. But after 23 years of marriage, I'd learned that some lessons need to be taught differently. Sometimes the best revenge isn't loud and angry. It's quiet, calculated, and sticky. I waited until their voices faded and heard the back door close. Through my kitchen window, I watched Marjorie hurry to her car, smoothing her hair and adjusting her dress. Jerome appeared on the back porch a few minutes later, lighting a cigarette, a habit he'd supposedly quit years ago. Another lie to add to the pile. That evening I served Jerome his favorite dinner, fried chicken, mac and cheese, and collard greens. I smiled and asked about his day at the shop, listened to his lies about a busy afternoon with customers, and planned my revenge. But before I tell you about the special delivery I planned for their next afternoon rendezvous, let me ask you this. Should I have confronted them right then and there? Tell me what you think in the comments below. 'Cause what happened next wasn't just about teaching Jerome and Marjorie a lesson. It was about standing up for every woman who's ever been betrayed by the 2 people she trusted most in the world. And believe me, when those firefighters finally showed up, they got a chemistry lesson they never expected. The next morning I woke up early and made Jerome's breakfast like nothing was wrong. Eggs over easy, grits with butter, and his favorite buttermilk biscuits. As I watched him eat, I thought about how patterns never lie. Every Tuesday and Thursday he'd claim to have late inventory at the shop. Every Tuesday and Thursday, Marjorie's blue Cadillac would be conveniently absent from her driveway. If you're enjoying this story so far, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Trust me, what happens next is something you won't want to miss. I waited until Jerome left for work before I went to my classroom at Clayton County High. Being department head had its perks, like having access to the chemistry lab during summer break. I pulled out my special supplies, industrial strength adhesive, the kind we use to fix lab equipment. The bottle carried a warning label that would make most people nervous, but it made me smile. You see, what most people don't know about industrial adhesives is that they're not just strong, they're unforgiving. Once they bond, breaking that bond becomes nearly impossible without the right solvent, and I had no intention of leaving any solvent nearby. I modified the adhesive slightly, using my knowledge of chemical reactions to make it delayed acting. It would take about 5 minutes to reach full bonding strength, just enough time for them to get comfortable and not notice anything amiss. 3 years of teaching chemistry was about to pay off, in ways the school board never intended. The hardest part was keeping my composure when Marjorie called that afternoon. "Rose, honey, I'm bringing over some of my famous cornbread tomorrow." Jerome mentioned how much he missed it at Sunday dinner. The audacity of this woman made my blood boil, but my voice remained sweet as maple syrup. "Oh, that's so thoughtful of you, Marjorie. But don't go through any trouble. I know how busy you are on Thursday." I heard her slight intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Oh, no trouble at all. I'll drop by around 2 o'clock, I said, letting a slight edge creep into my voice. "Isn't that when you usually get your hair done?" Another pause. I switched my appointment. That night I prepared everything carefully. I removed the regular sheets from our bed and replaced them with old ones. Then I applied my special adhesive mixture in strategic spots. Not everywhere, mind you, just in places where skin would likely make contact. The clear liquid disappeared into the fabric, waiting to be activated by pressure and body heat. Looking back now, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been so calm about doing something you knew would change everything? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. The next day I left the house at my usual time, but parked my car around the corner. At 1:55 p.m., right on schedule, Marjorie's blue Cadillac pulled into our driveway. She didn't even bother looking around before using her key, the spare key I didn't know she had, to let herself in. Jerome's truck arrived 5 minutes later. I gave them 15 minutes. Long enough to get comfortable, long enough for my special adhesive to do its work. Then I called the fire department. "Yes, I'm worried about a fire at my house," I told the dispatcher, keeping my voice concerned and elderly sounding. "I see smoke coming from the upstairs window, and I know my husband is home for lunch." I watched from my neighbor's house as 3 fire trucks roared up to our house, sirens blaring. The firefighters, bless their hearts, didn't waste any time. They broke down our front door and charged upstairs, only to find something very different from what they expected. The sounds that came from that bedroom, the shouts, the explanations, the desperate attempts to cover up what couldn't be covered, were better than any symphony I'd ever heard. But here's where it gets interesting. When they tried to separate, they couldn't. My modified adhesive had created a bond stronger than their illicit one. The firefighters, professional as they were, couldn't quite keep straight faces as they radioed for backup. "We're gonna need, special assistance here," one of them said into his radio, trying not to laugh, "and maybe a privacy screen." That's when I made my entrance, walking calmly through my front door like I'd just returned from running errands. The look on Jerome's face when he saw me, well, if looks could kill, I wouldn't be here telling this story. But the thing about chemistry is, it doesn't care about looks, or excuses, or 23 years of lies. "Oh my," I said, putting on my best shocked expression. "What seems to be the problem here?" But before I tell you about the emergency room visit that followed, and how the story made its way through every beauty parlor and church gathering in Clayton County, let me ask you this. Was my revenge too harsh, or not harsh enough? Because sometimes, the best lessons in life don't come from textbooks or Sunday sermons. Sometimes they come from a chemistry teacher who knows exactly how to make things stick. If you think the firefighters having to carry my husband and his mistress out of my house still stuck together was the climax of this story, honey, you better hold on to your seat. But before I continue, if you're just joining us, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss how this all ends. The emergency room at Clayton County General had never seen anything quite like it. Jerome and Marjorie, still partially clothed where the fabric had fused to their skin, had to be wheeled in on the same gurney. Picture that for a moment. My husband of 23 years and my former best friend, stuck together like 2 pages in a wet book, being rolled through those sliding doors while trying to maintain what little dignity they had left. I followed behind them in my car, taking my sweet time. When I arrived, the waiting room was buzzing with whispers. You see, in a small Georgia town like ours, news travels faster than kudzu grows. By the time I walked in, half the hospital staff had coincidentally found reasons to pass by the emergency room.
If you're enjoying the story so far, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel grow and lets me keep bringing you more amazing love stories. All right, back to the story.
Mrs. Mitchell, Dr. Williams called out when he saw me. I'd taught his daughter chemistry just the year before. We, seem to have an unusual situation here. So I've heard, I replied, smoothing my dress. I came as soon as I could. Oh, I can't imagine how such a thing could have happened in my own bedroom. I made sure to emphasize those last 2 words. The doctor cleared his throat. Well, we're dealing with some sort of industrial strength adhesive. Would you happen to know anything about that? I put on my best chemistry teacher face, the one I used when students tried to explain why their homework mysteriously disappeared. Doctor, as a chemistry teacher, I know lots about adhesive. For instance, did you know that some bonds can only be broken by specific solvents at specific temperatures? If you're wondering whether what I did was legal, drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective. The next few hours were pure theater. The hospital had to call in a specialist from Atlanta, Dr. Sarah Chen, a chemical engineer who specialized in industrial accidents. When she arrived, she took one look at the adhesive's composition and let out a low whistle. This is fascinating, she said, examining the test results. The molecular bonds have been modified to activate slowly and strengthen over time. Whoever created this knew exactly what they were doing. I sat in the corner, working on my crossword puzzle, the picture of concerned wife and friend. Jerome and Marjorie couldn't even look at me. They were too busy trying to explain to their children, who'd both rushed to the hospital, why they were in this predicament. Marjorie's daughter, Tracy, who I'd taught 3 years prior, looked at her mother with such disappointment, it almost made me feel sorry for her. "Oh, Mama," Tracy said, her voice cracking. "How could you, with Uncle Jerome?" Jerome's son Marcus just stood there, shaking his head. "Dad, really? With Aunt Marjorie? In your own bed?" The shame on their faces was worth every minute of planning. But here's something nobody expected. While they were stuck together, they started arguing. Apparently, this wasn't their first indiscretion. As the doctors worked to separate them, their secrets spilled out like overturned honey. "You told me you were leaving Rose," Marjorie hissed. "And you told me you were ending things with Robert," Jerome shot back. "Wait for it. Yes, you heard that right. Robert." My eyebrows shot up so high they nearly left my face. Robert was Marjorie's husband of 30 years, who worked as a traveling salesman. Suddenly, all those business trips he took made a new kind of sense. I'd like to pause here and ask, how many of you saw that twist coming? Let me know in the comments. Dr. Chen finally figured out how to separate them, but it involved a complex solution that had to be special order. They spent 8 hours stuck together in that emergency room, their sins literally binding them together for all to see. By evening, every church lady in 3 counties had heard the story. My phone started ringing off the hook. Calls of support, prayers, and not-so-subtle requests for gossip. Miss Betty from my Sunday school class brought me a sweet potato pie, a direct shot at Marjorie's famous recipe. "Rose," she said, patting my hand, "sometimes the Lord works in mysterious ways, and sometimes he works through chemistry teachers." But the real drama was yet to come. Because while Jerome and Marjorie were stuck together in that hospital room, Robert was flying home early from his business trip, which, it turned out, wasn't exactly all business, and he was about to walk into that emergency room with some explaining of his own to do. The question wasn't just about how they'd separate Jerome and Marjorie anymore. It was about how many marriages would survive this Thursday afternoon, and whether the emergency room had enough beds for all the hearts about to be broken. Before I tell you about Robert's grand entrance and the secret he brought home with him, let me ask you this. Do you believe in karma? Because what happened next might just change your mind. Before I tell you about Robert's dramatic entrance, take a moment to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this story of sweet, sticky revenge. Trust me, what happens next is something you won't want to miss. Robert burst into the emergency room around 7 p.m., still carrying his carry-on luggage, but he wasn't alone. Following close behind him was a petite blonde woman in her 30s, his secretary, Lisa. As it turned out, the look on Marjorie's face when she saw them, still partially stuck to Jerome, was worth every penny I'd spent on that adhesive. What in God's name? Robert stopped dead in his tracks, his face turning from confusion to understanding to rage in the span of seconds. Marjorie, with Jerome? But before Marjorie could respond, Lisa stepped forward, her face flushed. Robert, honey, maybe we should... Honey, Marjorie screeched, trying to point at Lisa but pulling Jerome with her. Did she just call you honey? The emergency room fell silent. Even the nurses stopped pretending to check charts. Dr. Chen paused mid-solution application, her gloved hands hovering over Jerome's shoulder. I sat back in my chair, pulled out a pack of peppermint candies, and offered one to Tracy, who had sunk into the seat next to me. Sometimes, I whispered to her, the best thing to do is just watch it all burn. For those wondering how this could get any worse, just hold on to your hat. Drop a comment below with your predictions. I'd love to see if anyone guesses what happened next. Robert, his face now as red as a Georgia tomato, tried to maintain his dignity. Now, Marjorie, I can explain. Marjorie's voice hit a pitch that probably had dogs howling in the next county. Explain why you're walking in here with that, while you're what? Robert shot back. Stuck to another woman's husband, in their bed. Jerome, who had been unusually quiet until now, decided this was the perfect moment to add his 2 cents. At least we kept it in the neighborhood, Robert. You had to go all the way to Atlanta. Lisa's eyes widened. Atlanta? But what about Rachel in Memphis? And Susan in Charleston? The room erupted. Tracy gasped beside me. Marcus kicked a trash can. Dr. Chen muttered something in Mandarin that I'm pretty sure wasn't medical terminology. I think, I said, standing up and smoothing my dress. This might be a good time for me to make a phone call. I stepped into the hallway and dialed a number I'd been saving for just this moment. Hello, Pastor Williams. Yes, I think you might want to come down to the emergency room. Seems we're having ourselves a little revival of sorts. You see, Pastor Williams wasn't just our spiritual leader. He was also the head of the marriage counseling committee, and more importantly, the editor of our church newsletter. If this story was going to spread, and honey, it was definitely going to spread, I wanted it told right. While I waited for the pastor, the scene inside continued to unfold like a soap opera written by Tennessee Williams after too much bourbon. 3 years. Marjorie was crying now. You've been running around for 3 years. And how long have you been sleeping with Jerome? Lisa shot back, surprisingly invested for someone who'd just been exposed as the other woman. 2 years, Jerome mumbled. 5, Marjorie corrected. The look on Jerome's face was priceless. 5, but we only started after the church picnic in No, baby, Marjorie said, momentarily forgetting her rage at Robert. Remember that Christmas party in '80, when Rose had the flu? I cleared my throat. Actually, I never had the flu. I just wanted to see if my husband would cheat on me, if given the chance. All eyes turned to me. What? I'm a chemistry teacher. We believe in testing hypotheses. Pastor Williams chose that moment to walk in, his Bible tucked under his arm. He took one look at the scene. Jerome and Marjorie still partially stuck together. Robert and Lisa standing awkwardly by the door, and me calmly unwrapping another peppermint, and said, Lord have mercy. Oh, he's had mercy, all right. He gave me the knowledge of chemical compounds and the patience to use them wisely. The pastor turned to me, realization dawning on his face. Sister Rose, did you create a situation where the truth would stick out? Yes, Pastor. I believe I did. For those of you wondering about the legal implications, let me just say this. It's amazing what people won't pursue in court when it means their sins would be documented in public record. But here's where it gets really interesting. As Dr. Chen finally separated Jerome and Marjorie, Lisa stepped forward with one final bombshell. "I suppose," she said, clutching her purse, "this would be a bad time to mention I'm pregnant." Robert's knees gave out. He had to sit down on my empty chair, which I'd thoughtfully moved next to the trash can Marcus had kicked early. Sometimes revenge is like a chemical reaction. You can plan it carefully, measure everything precisely, but once it starts, there's no controlling the chain reaction that follows. Before I reveal the final twist in this tale of infidelity and industrial adhesives, let me ask you this. What would you do if you discovered your spouse's betrayal was just the tip of the iceberg? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Because what happened next would shake our little community to its foundations and prove that sometimes the best revenge isn't what you do, it's what you set in motion and then step back to watch unfold. Chapter 5: Deeper Waters. If you've made it this far in my story, hit that subscribe button, because what I'm about to tell you proves that some scandals have deeper roots than kudzu vines in August. A week after the hospital incident, while the town was still buzzing about the sticky situation, I received an unexpected visitor. It was Jerome's mother, Miss Beatrice, standing on my porch at 7 a.m. sharp, holding her famous sweet potato pie. "Rose," she said, her voice firm as steel, "we need to talk about what's in your attic." Now I hadn't been in our attic for years. Jerome had always insisted on handling anything up there, claiming he was protecting me from the dust and heat, but Miss Beatrice's tone made my chemistry teacher instincts tingle. "If you think you know where this is heading, drop your prediction in the comments below. Trust me, nobody saw this coming." I followed her up those narrow stairs, watching as she moved with surprising agility for a woman of 78. She went straight to the far corner, behind some old Christmas decorations, and pointed to a locked trunk I'd never seen before. "The key," she said, pulling a chain from around her neck, "has been burning a hole in my conscience for 20 years. Inside that trunk was enough evidence to turn our small-town scandal into something that would make headlines across the state. Count books, property deeds, and photographs. So many photographs, all pointing to one conclusion: Jerome and Robert weren't just cheating husbands. They were running a sophisticated real estate scheme across 3 states. They'd find vulnerable women, Miss Beatrice explained, her hands trembling as she showed me the documents, convince them to invest in property developments that didn't exist. Marjorie handled the paperwork, made everything look legitimate. "But why are you showing me this now?" I asked. She straightened her spine, looking every inch the former school teacher she was. "Because 20 years ago, they did the same thing to my sister. She lost everything, died thinking she'd made bad investments. I've been gathering evidence ever since, waiting for the right moment." "And you think this is it, child?" She smiled. "You didn't just expose their infidelity. You created the perfect storm. Now it's time to bring the thunder. For those wondering about karma, stick around. Sometimes it needs a little help from a mother-in-law with a 2-decade grudge." I called Tracy and Marcus over that afternoon. They deserved to know the truth about their fathers. As we went through the documents, more pieces fell into place. The auto shop, the traveling sales routes, even Marjorie's volunteer bookkeeping. It was all part of their scheme. "That explains the new families moving into those empty developments," Tracy said, showing us something on her phone. "They're all connected to Lisa's daddy's law firm. They've been investigating white-collar crime patterns across the southeast." Marcus let out a low whistle. "And here I thought Dad was just bad at staying faithful. Turns out he was bad at everything." I thought about all those years teaching chemistry, explaining how the smallest molecules could create the biggest reaction. Now I was watching a different kind of chain reaction unfold, one that would affect hundreds of lives. Before I reveal what we did with this information, let me ask you, what would you do if you discovered your spouse's betrayal was just the surface of a much darker truth? Share your thoughts below. Miss Beatrice and I spent the next few days organizing the evidence. We made copies, lots of copies. One set went to Lisa's father, the federal prosecutor, another to the state attorney general's office, and just to be thorough, we sent one to that church newsletter network, because sometimes the Lord's work needs a little help from the postal service. But here's where it gets really interesting. As we were going through the trunk, we found something else. A series of letters between Jerome and someone named Catherine in Savannah. The postmarks went back 30 years, right around the time Jerome and I got married. I think Miss Beatrice said softly. It's time you learned why I really agreed to Jerome marrying you. And that's when I discovered that my marriage wasn't just built on lies. It was part of a bigger plan that started long before I ever met Jerome. A plan that would shake our community to its foundations and prove that some secrets refuse to stay buried, no matter how deep you try to hide them. But before I tell you about Catherine and the real reason Jerome married me, let me know in the comments if you've ever discovered that a betrayal was much bigger than you initially thought. Because what happens next isn't just about revenge or justice. It's about uncovering a truth so shocking that even my industrial strength adhesive couldn't have held it together. Remember to like and subscribe for the rest of this story, because we're only halfway through this tale of deception, justice, and the bonds that break us. Before I dive into the bombshell Miss Beatrice dropped that day, take a moment to subscribe. What I'm about to reveal changed everything I thought I knew about my 23-year marriage. Catherine wasn't just some woman from Savannah. She was Jerome's first wife. Yes, you read that right. The marriage I thought was Jerome's first and only had actually been his second. But that's not even the most shocking part. Catherine was my best friend's daughter, Miss Beatrice explained, her hand smoothing out yellowed photographs on my kitchen table. She and Jerome were married for 6 months before she disappeared. Everyone thought she'd run off with another man, but if you're getting chills right now, drop a win in the comments, because what comes next had me questioning everything. Catherine hadn't run away. According to the letters we found, she discovered something about Jerome's family business, something that made her a threat. The last letter, dated 3 weeks before her disappearance, mentioned proof in the old factory, and can't believe what they're doing to those people. The old factory? I asked, my teacher's mind already connecting dots. You mean the abandoned Mitchell textile mill? Miss Beatrice nodded slowly. The same one that mysteriously ruins down in 1962, taking all its records with it. The same year Catherine vanished. I felt sick. The mill had been a major employer in our county, and its closure had devastated hundreds of families. I'd always accepted the official story about faulty wiring, just like I'd accepted Jerome's stories about working late at the auto shop. Rose, Miss Beatrice leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. Jerome married you because you were perfect cover, a respected chemistry teacher, active in the church, no family left to ask difficult questions. They needed someone above suspicion. The weight of those words hit me like a sledgehammer. All these years I'd thought Jerome chose me for love. Instead, I'd been selected like a chemical compound for its stabilizing properties. For those wondering how I kept my composure, let me just say that 23 years of teaching teenagers had given me an excellent poker face. But Miss Beatrice wasn't finished. She pulled out one more document, a life insurance policy on Catherine, taken out just weeks before she vanished. The beneficiary, a company I recognized from the real estate scheme documents. The same pattern, she explained. They'd marry women with assets or useful social positions, use them for their schemes. And when things got complicated, I finished her thought. They'd make the complications disappear. That's when Tracy called. She'd been doing some digging of her own and found something interesting. Aunt Rose, you know how Dad always handled the attic. I think I know why. I just talked to our old neighbor, Mrs. Johnson. She swears she saw him and Uncle Robert carrying heavy trunks up there late at night back in '82. Before she could continue, we heard a crash from upstairs. Someone was in the attic. If you think the adhesive incident was dramatic, hold on to your seat. What happened next makes that look like a Sunday school picnic. I grabbed my phone, but instead of calling the police, I dialed a different number. You see, while everyone had been focused on the scandal at the hospital, I'd made some connections of my own. That chemical company that was interested in my adhesive formula, they had a security division, staffed by former FBI agents. Mr. Thompson, I said when he answered. Remember how you said I should call if I found anything suspicious? Well, I think someone's trying to clean up some very old messes in my attic. Within minutes, unmarked cars surrounded my house. It turns out federal agents take a keen interest when you mention possible evidence in decades-old disappearances. The person in my attic, Robert's brother Tommy, who'd been the mill's accountant back in '62. He'd come to remove anything that might connect the current real estate scheme to the mill's closure and Catherine's disappearance. But he was too late. Miss Beatrice had already moved the most damaging evidence to a safety deposit box. I learned from Catherine's mistake, she said. Always keep your proof where they can't burn it. Before I tell you what those documents revealed about the true nature of the Mitchell family business, let me ask, have you ever discovered that a small deception was actually part of something much darker? Share your experiences below, because what we found in those papers would not only solve a decades-old disappearance, but would also expose a conspiracy that reached into every corner of our community. And suddenly, my revenge with the adhesive seemed almost quaint in comparison. Remember to like and subscribe, because this story is about to take us places darker than a Georgia night with no moon, where old sins cast long shadows, and where justice sometimes needs a little help from a chemistry teacher who's finally had enough. If you've been following along, you might want to grab something to hold on to. What I'm about to share makes everything else look like a warm-up act. Hit that subscribe button, because this chapter reveals why a simple case of infidelity led to the unraveling of 3 generations of secrets. The documents Miss Beatrice saved weren't just about Catherine's disappearance. They detailed a system of fraud, exploitation, and worse that stretched back to when the Mitchell textile mill first opened in 1940. Jerome's grandfather had started it all, and each generation had perfected the scheme. They targeted women, I explained to the federal agents who'd set up camp in my living room, not just as wives, but as investors, employees, anyone they could use and discard. Agent Sarah Martinez spread the papers across my dining table, the same table where I'd served Jerome dinner for 23 years. Mrs. Mitchell, do you recognize any of these names? I did. They were the names of women who'd moved away suddenly over the years. Some had been mill workers, others investors. All had disappeared after asking too many questions. If you're wondering how nobody noticed this pattern sooner, drop your thoughts in the comments below. The mill fire wasn't an accident, Miss Beatrice added, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. Catherine found proof they'd been embezzling worker pensions, running an illegal lending scheme. When she threatened to expose them, they solved the problem permanently. Agent Martinez finished, and used the fire to destroy the evidence. But Catherine had been smarter than they realized. Before she disappeared, she'd mailed copies of key documents to her cousin in Atlanta. That cousin, now elderly and suffering from dementia, had kept them all these years in her attic. Miss Beatrice had found them while helping the family clean out the house. Tracy arrived with more revelations. She'd been interviewing former mill workers, recording their story. The pattern was always the same, she explained. Women would take out loans from the mill's employee assistance program. When they couldn't pay, they'd be offered a choice: work it off with extra shifts, or disappear with a new identity somewhere else. But they never arrived at their new locations, Agent Martinez noted grimly. I thought about all the chemistry lessons I'd taught about reactions and catalysts. Sometimes the smallest change could trigger a cascade of events that couldn't be stopped. My adhesive revenge had been that catalyst, exposing not just infidelity but decades of calculated evil. Mrs. Mitchell, Agent Martinez said, "We need to move you to a safe location, once they realize how much you know." Before she could finish, my phone rang. It was Jerome. "Rose," his voice was different, desperate, afraid. "We need to talk. There are things you don't understand." "Oh, I understand plenty," I replied, putting him on speaker. "Like why you really married me. How many others were there, Jerome? How many women besides Catherine?" The line went silent for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was cold. "You always were too smart for your own good. Just like she was. For those thinking this couldn't get more intense, hold on to your seats. The difference is," I said, "I'm not alone, and I'm not afraid." That's when we heard the sirens, not coming to my house, but heading toward the old mill site where Jerome had been hiding. Turns out, when federal agents investigate decades of disappearances, they bring ground-penetrating radar. Miss Beatrice gripped my hand as we watched the evening news. They'd found something at the mill site. Several somethings. The reporter's voice was solemn as she described the ongoing excavation. But before I tell you what they discovered beneath that old mill floor, let me ask, how far would you go to expose the truth, knowing it could destroy everything and everyone around you? Because what they found wasn't just evidence of financial crime, it was proof of something far darker, something that would shake our community to its core and force everyone to question how well they really knew their neighbors. What I'm about to share isn't just shocking. It's the kind of truth that changes a community forever. The excavation took 3 days. I watched from my new safe house as local news helicopters circled the old mill site like vultures. By day 2, they'd found 7 sets of remains. By day 3, the count had doubled. 14 women, Agent Martinez said during our morning briefing, all buried beneath the concrete floor of the mill's old storage room. Initial forensics suggest the earliest burial dates back to... If you're feeling a chill right now, drop oil in the comments for these women who were silenced for far too long. But here's where it gets even more twisted. Each victim was found with a peculiar item. A simple gold wedding band with a distinctive pattern. The same pattern I'd noticed on Jerome's mother's ring. The one she'd told me was a Mitchell family tradition. They weren't just killing their victims, Tracy said, her voice shaking, as she showed us her research. They were marrying them first. Every single one of these women was legally married to a Mitchell man before they disappeared. The pattern was devastating in its simplicity. The Mitchell men would find women with either money, useful social positions, or dangerous knowledge. They'd court them, marry them, use them for whatever purpose they needed. And when the women became suspicious or inconvenient, the mill floor got a new layer of concrete. Miss Beatrice finished grimly. Catherine was lucky in a way. At least she saw it coming, and got her evidence out first. I thought about my own marriage, how I'd been chosen because of my position in the community, my clean reputation, my chemistry expertise. They needed me to help validate their real estate schemes. I realized a respected teacher's signature on documents carries weight. Agent Martinez nodded. And when you caught Jerome with Marjorie, they were probably planning my accident already. I finished. The adhesive incident just accelerated their timeline. That's when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Should have stuck to teaching, Rose. Some chemicals are more permanent than adhesive. For those thinking this was just a threat, keep watching. The Mitchell family had one more card to play. Within hours, strange chemical odors started seeping through the ventilation system of my safe house. Agent Martinez recognized it immediately. Someone had rigged the air conditioning to release a toxic gas. They'd figured my chemistry knowledge would help me identify it and try to escape through the front door. Where they probably have someone waiting, Agent Martinez said as she led us out through a hidden back exit. They're using your expertise against you. But what they didn't know was that I'd anticipated this. Remember those evening chemistry classes I'd been teaching? Some of my students were local firefighters, and we'd been quietly testing the air quality around the mill site for weeks. The soil samples, I explained to the federal task force, they don't just prove murders, they prove decades of illegal chemical dumping. The Mitchell textile mill wasn't just a cover for financial fraud, it was a front for illegal chemical weapons manufacturing. The evidence was in the soil composition, the groundwater tests, and most importantly in a hidden bunker we found beneath the mill's main office. Inside were formulas, shipping manifests, and client lists that made hardened federal agents pale. Before I reveal who those clients were and how high this conspiracy really went, let me ask, have you ever discovered that evil isn't just about individual actions, but about systems built to protect the worst among us? Because what we uncovered wasn't just about the Mitchell family anymore. It was about a network of powerful people who'd used our small Georgia town as cover for something much darker. Rose, Miss Beatrice said, as we watched federal agents swarm the mill site. Remember how Jerome always said his daddy died of a heart attack? I think it's time you knew the truth about that too. And that's when she pulled out one final letter from Catherine. The one that explained why the Mitchell men really needed access to chemical expertise, and why they'd been so desperate to keep me close but ignorant all these years. Remember to like and subscribe, because we're approaching the climax of this story, where all the pieces finally come together, and where justice takes forms none of us could have predicted. Because sometimes the most dangerous chemicals aren't the ones you can see or smell. They're the secrets that eat away at the foundation of everything you thought you knew. If you've made it this far, brace yourself. What Catherine's final letter revealed makes everything else look like a simple family dispute. Hit subscribe, because this chapter connects all the dots in ways nobody saw coming. My dearest friend, Catherine's letter began. If you're reading this, I didn't make it out alive. But at least I can tell you why. Miss Beatrice, hands trembled as she read the letter aloud in our new safe location. A converted bunker beneath the FBI field office in Atlanta. The paper was yellowed, but the words were clear as day. Before I share what that letter said, Drop a bolus in the comments if you've ever discovered a truth that changed everything you thought you knew about your life. Jerome's father hadn't died of a heart attack. According to Catherine, he'd been eliminated by his own family when he threatened to expose their operation to the CDC. The Mitchell textile mill wasn't just manufacturing illegal chemicals. They were testing them on their own workers. The night shifts, I whispered, remembering Jerome's explanation for why certain employees only worked after dark. They weren't extra production hours. They were human trials, Agent Martinez confirmed. The women who disappeared, they weren't just murdered, they were test subjects first. The letter detailed how Catherine had discovered the truth. As the mill's nurse, she'd noticed patterns in the night shift workers' symptoms. Strange burns, unexplained paralysis, memory loss. When she started keeping secret records, she discovered something even more sinister. The Mitchell men weren't just choosing their wives for money or position, Tracy said, reviewing Catherine's notes. They were selecting them based on genetic markers. They were looking for specific DNA combinations. I felt the blood drain from my face. My chemistry background. It wasn't just about having a respectable signature on documents, was it? Agent Martinez shook her head. Your genetic profile matched what they were looking for. They needed someone who could potentially survive exposure to their compounds. That's when the final piece clicked into place. All those times Jerome had insisted on handling household chemicals himself, the way he'd always brought me pre-mixed cleaning solutions, how he'd discouraged me from working with certain compounds in my classroom. They were conditioning me, I realized, building up my tolerance gradually. But why? Miss Beatrice pulled out one more document, a military contract from Nigeria. They were trying to create human beings who could survive chemical warfare. The perfect soldiers, immune to chemical weapons. For those thinking this sounds like science fiction, I wish it. The evidence was all there in black and white, stamped with government seals and signed by names we'd all recognize. The real money wasn't in textiles, Agent Martinez explained. It was in creating chemically enhanced human beings. The women who disappeared, their bodies were used to refine the process. And the ones who survived, they were bred to create the next generation. I thought about my 2 miscarriages, how Jerome had seemed more disappointed than grieving. He wasn't trying to have children, I said slowly. He was trying to create test subjects. That's when my phone rang again. This time, it was Marjorie. Rose, she was crying. I didn't know, not all of it, but I'm pregnant. And they want the baby. Before I could respond, we heard gunshots outside the FBI building. Jerome and Robert hadn't run away after all. They'd been waiting, watching, planning something bigger than any of us had imagined. It's not just about the evidence anymore, Agent Martinez said, checking her weapon. They can't let their experiments go public, and they definitely can't let any potential successful subjects get away. For those wondering how deep this conspiracy goes, hold on to your seats, because what happened next proved that some government projects never really die. They just go underground, waiting for the right moment to resurface. But before I tell you about the siege at the FBI building and the choice I had to make between exposing the truth and protecting the future, let me ask, what would you do if you discovered you were part of an experiment that had been running for generations? If you followed this story from the beginning, you know it started with a simple act of revenge involving adhesive. But now, as I sit here in my new home in an undisclosed location, I realize it was always about something much bigger. Before I reveal how it all ended, make sure to subscribe. This finale will shake you to your core. The siege at the FBI building lasted 6 hours. Jerome and Robert hadn't come alone. They'd brought with them a small army of people. Others like me, chemically altered over years without their knowledge. But unlike me, they were loyal to the program, believing they were part of something greater. You could join us, Rose, Jerome called out through the bullhorn. You're one of the successful ones. Your body adapted to everything we gave you. Think about what we could achieve together. If you're wondering how this ends, drop a LLR in the comments, because sometimes the best weapon against evil is the very thing they tried to use against you. You see, while they thought they were slowly making me immune to their chemicals, I'd been studying every compound they exposed me to. 23 years of careful documentation, hidden in my classroom under the guise of lesson plans. Agent Martinez, I said, pulling out my old teaching notebook. I know how to stop them. The formula was simple, really. Basic chemistry. Their experiments had made their subjects resistant to most chemicals, but they'd overlooked one crucial fact. I wasn't just any chemistry teacher. I was the one who'd created that industrial strength adhesive. Their enhanced metabolism, I explained. It makes them process chemicals faster. But what if we gave them something that gets stronger the more their bodies try to break it down? Miss Beatrice smiled for the first time in days. Just like how your adhesive got stronger with body heat. Working with the FBI's chemical response team, we modified my adhesive formula. Within an hour we had weaponized it into an aerosol form. But there was a catch. Someone would have to get close enough to release it. I'll do it, I said. They won't shoot me. They need me alive for their research. Before anyone could stop me, I walked out the front door of the FBI building carrying what looked like a surrender flag. Jerome's smile when he saw me was the same one he'd worn on our wedding day. Confident, controlling, completely unaware that he was about to fall into my trap. I knew you'd make the right choice, he said, reaching for my hand. That's when I triggered the aerosol device. The effect was immediate. Everyone within a 20-foot radius found themselves slowly freezing in place as the compound reacted with their chemically altered biology. The more their enhanced bodies tried to fight it, the stronger the bonds became. The thing about chemical enhancement, I said, watching Jerome's smile fade as he realized he couldn't move, is that it follows predictable patterns. Just like love, just like betrayal, the FBI moved in, taking custody of 17 people who were quite literally stuck in their trap. The testing revealed what we'd suspected. Decades of chemical exposure had changed their very DNA. They were stronger, faster healers, more resistant to toxins, and now, completely immobilized by a compound of my own design. But this isn't just about victory. As I watched them load Jerome and his conspirators into special containment vehicles, I thought about all the women buried under that mill floor, about Catherine, who died trying to expose the truth, about how many other communities might have similar secrets buried under their foundation. It's over, Agent Martinez said, but we both knew that wasn't entirely true. 3 months later, I testified before a closed Senate committee. The Mitchell textile mill case exposed decades of illegal government experiments, leading to the shutdown of 12 similar operations across the country. Marjorie's baby was born in protective custody, already showing signs of chemical enhancement. She's being monitored by doctors who understand what she might become. As for me, I still teach chemistry, but now it's at a special facility for others like me, survivors of unauthorized chemical testing who need to understand what was done to them. Some days when I look in the mirror, I wonder how much of me is still human and how much was changed by Jerome's careful poisoning. But before I end this story, let me ask you one final question. What makes us human? Is it our natural biology, or is it the choices we make when faced with inhuman circumstances? If you've stayed with me through this whole journey, you know it wasn't really about revenge. It was about justice, truth, and the courage to stand up against evil, even when that evil has literally become part of your DNA. The Mitchell textile mill has been demolished now, the ground sealed with concrete mixed with my special adhesive formula, ensuring those secrets stay buried forever. But its story lives on as a warning about the darkness humans are capable of, and the strength it takes to bring that darkness into the light. Thank you for listening to my story. Remember to like and subscribe if you want to hear more about the ongoing investigations and the others like me who are still out there fighting battles most people don't even know exist. Because sometimes the most important chemical reaction isn't the one that changes our bodies, it's the one that changes our hearts, transforming victims into warriors and tragedy into triumph. If this story moved you, share it with others who need to hear that justice is possible, even against the most powerful enemies. Don't forget to subscribe for updates on the ongoing investigations and the stories of other survivors.